welcome to this special edition of Today's Faith Matters. I'm Josh Benner, and I'm so excited to be joined by our guest today, Steve Baughman, who uh, is the expert on Ravi Zacharias. And Steve, if they gave honorary doctorates for knowledge of Ravi, you would definitely have one. Um,
Yeah,
Steve,
for what that'd be worth. But
but
thank you for
Steve,
having me. Looking
it's a
forward
joy
to
to
talking.
have you. And just briefly, I know several years ago is when you started investigating Robbie's academic claims. And before I say that, we're recording just a couple hours after the report was released by Martin and Miller that confirms the sexual misconduct from Ravi Zacharias. But I would love to begin just briefly, Steve, with your experience with investigating Ravi. And I know it began with academic credentials and just how we've led to where we are today.
Yeah, this is a really big afternoon, Josh. I've been doing 5.5 years now of investigating Ravi and finding dirt after dirt after dirt. And I can't tell you the vitriol that his defenders are capable of throwing at people who criticize him. This is a cult. This was a highly deceptive man who had a double life for many, many years, and his followers treat him like a guru who they put their religious faith in him and have been absolutely vicious about those of us who've been criticizing Ravi just by presenting evidence of his misconduct. And today, we now know that we were right. His ministry just issued a statement about an hour ago saying that Lori Ann Thompson told the truth about her relationship with Ravi. Yes, indeed, he had groomed her. They found nude photos on Ravi's cellular devices of massage women in Asia and in other places, love letters, grooming statements that he made to women and that were still on his phones. So we now know beyond any doubt Ravi Zacharias was a sexual predator and a highly deceptive man. And the question now is going to be, what do we do with that information? As for me, my role in this whole thing is about 5.5 years ago, as part of my religious studies and wanting to keep track of the best Christian apologists out there. I'm a religious skeptic. I don't believe in God, but I'm very interested in religious truth if it exists. I found this guy named Ravi Zacharias, and I was very smitten with his argument, which was backed up by Oxford and Cambridge credentials, very impeccable scholarly resume, and I found myself thinking that if this guy's telling the truth, I need to change my worldview. Anyway, I looked into it and I found that he had been lying about his credentials, and then I looked into it some more and I found that he'd been lying about even more of his credentials. And then pretty much the only thing the guy had was a master's of divinity. No offense, Josh, but and he'd been lying about being a professor at Oxford and a visiting scholar at Cambridge, and he'd carefully masked the fact that he had no earned doctorate degrees. But nobody really cared about that. That was just the Ravi clan didn't want to look at evidence like that. His scholarly colleagues didn't bother with it. Nobody said anything. It was business as usual. And it wasn't till it turned into sex that the Christian world started caring. And even then, they in 2017 he filed a lawsuit against the married Canadian woman, and the lawsuit was transparently bogus, far-fetched, but the Christian press gobbled it up. His followers felt that it vindicated him. This poor woman was eviscerated as an extortionist. And it wasn't till September of this year when I was able to confirm that Ravi had owned a couple of massage spas in Georgia and had been sexually active with two of the women in those spas, that the Christian world started giving a rat's ass about his misconduct. Up until then, just a couple months before, he'd been on the road to sainthood with Vice President Pence, saying he was a good man, a godly man, and a man who spoke truth. And the truth is now out. So it's been an ugly journey, but a very, very important one, because he got away with it for decades. And that's really the issue now, is why did Ravi Zacharias successfully pull the wool over so many smart Christians for so many years?
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely an important question to consider today, and to continue, I think, for Christians to consider is just our standards of truth and what we believe. And I believe for everyone, truth should always be viewed as an intrinsic good and should always be sought, even if it's unpleasant truth.
Well, here's I'll tell you, this is nothing personal against you, but I am so cynical. I grew up in Southeast Asia around Southern Baptist missionaries. I admired the heck out of them. They were good folks. Those were the people, those were the cool kids, and their parents were the cool parents who were out doing work that they really believed in and were not greedy, and they were generous, and they were loving people. I had nothing but good things to feel about evangelicals. This whole Ravi thing changed that. That is one hell of a corrupt scene. Not everybody, not necessarily even most people, but that leadership is rotten to the core. The fact that Ravi could get away for all these years, all you needed to do was have typing skills and internet access, and you could see that he was lying about his credentials. His Cambridge and Oxford scholar colleagues who were part of his ministry knew he was lying about his credentials. Who was the first one to speak out? A little old atheist with some basic computer skills. I was the one to call him on this. Not a single person in the Christian tribe cared. They were happy to turn the other way, because he was bringing butts to the pews and bucks to the coffers. And it's really, that's the real lesson of the Ravi Zacharias scandal, not another corrupt preacher. There's going to be people like him again, and there have always been people like him, but that he was able to convince other Christians in leadership positions to not call him on it, to give him a pass for decades. That's the real story here. And I don't know where it's going to pan out. I hope you guys do something with it, because, my work is sort of done. The truth is now out, but what Christians do with it, it's up to you guys. And I hope you do something with it.
Yeah, thank you. And I do think it is important for Christians. All along, it really should have been Christians who were leading the charge on this.
Tell me about it. Not only because, they have these religious principles that they're committed to, but because they were the ones who knew, right? I mean, John Lennox, one of the most famous scholars in Ravi Zacharias' ministry, he must have known years ago that Ravi was lying about his credentials, because John Lennox actually has credentials from Cambridge.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's Oxford, I can't remember now, but John Lennox has the credentials that Ravi said that he had. And did John Lennox say anything? No, at least not publicly. And I could make a long list of Ravi Zacharias ministry scholars from Cambridge and Oxford who also must have known that Ravi was lying about his credentials and didn't say anything.
Yeah.
Why? I can't figure it out, other than they needed their jobs. They needed they loved that Ravi gave them large audiences to speak to. It was a very glamorous life that they had as Ravi Zacharias speakers, and maybe they just didn't want to rock the boat.
That seems quite possible. I should have mentioned in the beginning too that for anybody who's watching, that Steve has a book where he talks about Ravi's academic lies, for lack of a better term, and also getting into this sexual misconduct scandals called "Cover Up in the Kingdom," where he outlines this and gives evidence for it. And I'd love to ask you, Steve. So the report came out again about an hour ago, and again, you've spent years investigating Ravi, and I just am curious what your initial reaction is to the report itself.
Well, So there's two things here. There's the RZIM statement, which is fairly short. And that's the really important document to me, because that's the ministry saying we were wrong and Lori Ann Thompson was right. And we apologize to Ravi's victims. And we're heartbroken about this. That's a beautifully written document. The law firm report, I think it's 12 or 13 pages or so. That's just sordid details about Ravi having sent love emails to massage women in Southeast Asia and elsewhere. They had access to his phones, and so they were able to go through. There are several years of phones missing, so we don't know what happened during those years. But it's clear that Ravi was traveling around the world, having sexual relations with massage women. He had 200 massage women's contacts in his phones, love emails to them, and nude photos of them. So I don't recall exactly how many nude photos, but they were there. And so this is pretty damning stuff. And this is exactly the kind of stuff that Lori Ann Thompson was saying he did to her. And he was absolutely eviscerated, not just by RZIM, but by Christians on social media, Christians everywhere. Not all of them. There were some who supported her, but it was nasty. She was basically accused of conspiring with her husband to prostitute herself to catch Ravi in a compromising position so they could blackmail him for money. Now, Josh, I have to tell you, that curls my blood. It's one thing to engage in sexual impropriety, but when you're caught and you actually publicly devastate that woman's reputation with an allegation that she's pimping herself because she needs money from you, that's about as cruel as it gets. And that's exactly what Ravi did.
Yeah, I 100% agree. That's the thing that's always stuck out to me, and I've definitely gotten into debates with people over this story, and people who do want to make excuses or try to explain different things away. Um, Want to play the nobody's perfect card. Obviously, nobody's perfect, but yeah, to me, the thing
Oh
that's always
God,
been
tell
most
me about that. Yeah, I mean, how many times have I heard your tribe saying, "Don't judge, nobody's perfect." Romans 3:23, all have sinned. That's not the point, right? You know,
yeah. But the thing that's always been most striking to me is Ravi had the chance in his lifetime, because that's something people might lose. People who haven't followed it very closely might not realize, but that stuff with Lori Ann Thompson, these started to surface while he was still alive. And instead of owning up, which would have had at least a little bit of honor in it. Obviously, he was still wrong when he did, but owning his sin would have had been at least a little bit respectable. But that he totally turned the story and made the victim, painted her as the aggressor. It's just shameful.
and he continued his vigorous speaking tour, traveling around the world, knowing that he had viciously slandered, defamed the Thompsons, threw that Christian couple under the bus in a really vicious way. And he would still go and he would speak to audiences, and HarperCollins Christian Publishing continued giving him book contracts. Apologetics organizations and ministries would give him ministry awards. The Southern Baptist Convention invited him to speak at their national convention in Dallas just a few months after he paid for a non-disclosure agreement to keep this stuff silent. The list goes on and on. Evangelicalism is terribly corrupt. They did not care at all about what Ravi Zacharias had done, even though all you had to do was read that complaint carefully, that federal document. It was a public document. Read it carefully. You'll immediately see how implausible it was. And nobody cared. The momentum was way more important than the commitment to the God that they claim to worship. It's really out of control. I mean, I'm still flabbergasted by the whole thing. It's been 5.5 years of finding more bad stuff out about Ravi Zacharias, and I'm just baffled at the Christian response to it. Really, just astonishing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely there's no excuse for that, and that's why I appreciate the work of people like Julie Roys, who, as a Christian, is really investigating not just Ravi but lots of other claims. And
Yeah.
I think that's something that's really important. I know you have been on her program, and I appreciate the work that she does.
There have been some very good Christian folks who, Julie Roys was one. Julianne Smith has a blog where she was one of the very first people to post some of the emails between Ravi and Lorianne Thompson. Randall Rouser, a very good Christian apologist and academic from Canada, has been very good at speaking out. Warren Throckmorton, a Christian psychology professor. John Stackhouse. There are a few people who've really been deeply chagrined to their very core that this stuff is being done in Jesus' name. And have really spoken out. Dee Parson at the Wartburg Watch. But unfortunately, you can count the number of courageous Christians on, not on one hand, but you can definitely count them on two hands. And you don't even need all your fingers. The tribe was very complicit in enabling Ravi and in keeping his story from getting out. And once the evidence was out, they ignored it. You know, and that's the real story.
Yeah, sadly, too many did, and this is something I've tried to acknowledge before in my own writing. When I very first heard about these stories, it seems so implausible to me that I think that was probably my initial reaction too, and that's something I'm certainly not proud of personally. But I think it's important for Christians to continue to look into, again, the report itself. The ministry had this investigation done, and for anybody who still wants to make excuses, um, again, I realize that you're not a Christian, Steve. It's so interesting to me that the Bible itself, the New Testament specifically talks about people within the church who are wolves within the church. It should never surprise a Christian that there are people who are going to do abuse. I think that's one. I think the Bible is totally practical just to the human condition in those warnings, and too often we just want to make excuses, make perpetrators out to be victims, ignore facts that are before us. And again, I mean, those are all areas I think within Christendom where there's a lot of work that needs to be done.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's not my department to say how you guys should process this stuff, but as someone who cares about sex abuse victims and who cares about also, I mean, I'm a part-time grad student in philosophy with an emphasis on religion. I want us to have a good debate, right? I don't want to have people with fake credentials muddying the water. That's what Ravi did. And his apologetic colleagues let him do it. It's like, come on, folks. If someone in the secular world faked their credentials like that, their book contracts would be canceled, their book tours would be canceled, their books would be recalled, but not in the Christian world. In the Christian world, it's if you can get away with it, go for it. And I'm not trying to sound like some bitter atheist. I'm just astonished that this is true, that it's true of your tribe. Um, I don't, I can't explain it. I mean, I've never been this cynical before in my life about evangelical institutions, but the Ravi Zacharias story sure revealed a lot.
Yeah, I think part of it, and I mean, I'd love to get back to this. I think this is just my theory. I think part of it is so much of the church, and especially in America, I think so much of it is a business. And you just that's probably not even that revolutionary of an observation, but it's just there's too often a vested interest in wanting to ultimately protect the bottom line. And that's something I made a video, I think yesterday, where I talked about how, you know, again, I'm not trying to paint Robbie sympathetically, but for people to not hold him accountable was also not loving for Robbie either.
Yeah,
Really loving and caring about him would have also been demanding that he do the right thing and turn away from what he was doing.
yeah, that's a really good point, Josh. It's like, imagine if 40 years ago, when Ravi were just getting out of Trinity, or whatever it was, 35, 40 years ago, just getting out of seminary, and one of his more senior colleagues said, "Hey, Ravi, brother Ravi, you can't go pretending you've got doctorates. You got to be more upfront about your credentials." Right there, when he was just dipping his toe in the deception world and getting away with it. If someone had called him on that, his career may have turned out very differently. Instead, everybody from the Christian Missionary Alliance, his colleagues, his colleagues all over the apologetics world let him get away with it. If someone had given him a little bit of tough love, maybe he would have been a different person. But
Yeah, absolutely.
by the way, Ravi's not the only one doing this. He's just an interesting case because he presented himself as God's apostle to the academy. But the sex stuff, I mean, the stuff I'm hearing about evangelical organizations, a lot which I can't talk about, but there's a lot of it going on, and it's very abusive also. So I'm really hoping that this story prompts some serious systemic self-reflection. But anyway, I know you want to talk about the reports. So.
Yeah, no, you're good, and it certainly needs to. It's interesting. I think, again, as somebody who's in the evangelical camp, it's really easy for us to look at the issues that the Catholic Church has had, because that's not our group, and so it's easy to be critical of them. But there's plenty of issues that happen within evangelical circles, and again, far too often we fail at holding people accountable and just owning up to the truth and caring about people who have been victimized. And again, those are all areas where there really does need to be a reckoning.
Yeah, and you're right. Catholic Church has it. Criticize them all you want. They deserve it. And I'm the world I sympathize with. The Buddhist world has its sex problems. The yoga scene here in the San Francisco area has had its sex problems. It's anytime you have people putting leaders on a pedestal, you're going to have that leaders abusing it. So. Yeah. It's an ugly situation, but I'm really glad that we're forcing the issue and it's going to be talked about now, as regards Ravi Zacharias and how he fooled all the way up to the vice president of the United States, and so many people in apologetics ministry not speaking out.
Yeah, absolutely. I would be curious with the statement from RZIM and the report, again, for you as somebody who's spent years investigating these, just kind of, how are you feeling today?
Well, when I read their statement, I was worried about coming on your show with red eyes and red face because I was really teared up and I was quite choked up, mainly because I felt for Lori Ann and Brad. I mean, they have really, really suffered. I mean, can you imagine, Josh, if you and your wife get framed for something and everybody in the Christian world thinks you guys were out to blackmail somebody, and you were willing to have your wife do certain things so that you guys could make money, and that got believed, how devastated you'd feel. And after years of being just heavily criticized on social media, called all sorts of horrible names, to see Ravi Zacharias International Ministry come out and say, Lori Ann Thompson told the truth. That was a big moment for me.
Yeah.
Feels great. Feels great. And I imagine what it must be like for the Thompsons tonight. I hope they're drinking a lot of champagne tonight because they really have been through the ringer and they've been vindicated today.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's going to be really hard. I've spent a lot of time in the trenches of social media, and one of the most disturbing things about this whole journey has been how nasty and stupid, and by stupid, I don't mean low intelligence, but incapable of thinking clearly, Ravi Zacharias fans are. I mean, I really hope some Christian scholar or sociologist of religion goes through the social media discussions of Ravi, at my Friendly Banjo Atheist channel or on Twitter, and see how nasty and irrational his defenders have been. Really, really just not very impressive people. These are people who are like cult followers who become vicious if you present evidence against the leader. And that's a really disturbing phenomenon. This was a man who presented himself as let my people think. He was to help people think more clearly and logically. He wrote a book on God and logic, for crying out loud. Never passed that on to his people. They were really incapable of seeing logical fallacies in their devotion to the guru, and very disturbing. You know, so my point there was that Lorianne has been on social media a lot, and she's seen that stuff firsthand. So to be vindicated must feel really, really healing for both her and Brad. So I'm thrilled for them.
Yeah, I really hope it is. And it was earlier this week where she released her victim statement. And again, I would encourage anybody, I'm sure many won't, but anybody who wants to defend Ravi really should read her words.
Yeah.
Maybe
Yeah.
even more importantly than the report itself is her account. And
Yeah.
if you do read her account and the report, is you really see the overlap of Ravi's of a pattern that are described in both.
You know, and you have to wonder, the last almost 3 years of his life, Ravi knew what he had done to Lorianne Thompson. And she was there blogging away. She got her master's degree in church abuse kinds of issues. She was writing a beautiful poetic essays on her blog. And Ravi knew that he had defamed her. And I just wonder, how did he sleep at night unless he was just some sort of psychopath? And how did the people closest to him in ministry let him do that? You know, it's just a really disturbing question for me. You know, how can a guy go stand up in front of an audience and speak about the sanctifying power of the blood of Jesus when he's done that to a married woman and her husband? I don't get it.
It's unimaginable. Um, I would be curious. Um, I just lost my train of thought.
Yeah, that happened.
My wife can tell you that happens to me often. Um, with the ministry having this report done, you know, I know you talked earlier about their statement that they issued along with the report, but do you feel that the ministry has done enough to root out what really happened, or just what's your sense of that with your research into this?
You know, one of the things, I don't want to rain on the celebratory parade today. I'm very happy that the ministry let the law firm have a free hand, at least a relatively free hand, in investigating, and that they had the courage to release the report. But RZIM is still presenting this as, oh my God, we are so sorry we made a mistake. They didn't make a mistake. A lot of the people in ministry did not know about what was going on. But Michael Ramsden, president of RZIM, he must have known. Abdu Murray must have known. Ruth Malhotra must have known. There were a lot of people in leadership. Vince Vitale must have known. Those folks traveled with Ravi. They knew that he was a deceptive man. They knew that he ran that organization with an iron hand and did not tolerate dissent. They knew that he was a cult figure, and they stood by him. So for these folks to now, and of course his own family on the board, Sarah, his daughter Sarah Davis is the president. For these folks to say, we're really sorry we made a mistake, that really bothers me. You're sorry you got caught. Good for you for fessing up in a big way, but don't try to pretend that you're just so shocked by all this stuff. You had absolutely no idea that it was going on. You know, 2.5 years ago, or in 2017, when Ravi filed that lawsuit, you should have known that he was up to hanky-panky of an abusive variety with Ms. Thompson. It was pretty clear, and they didn't want to hold his feet to the fire, so they let him get away with it. And now they're sorry for their mistakes. It wasn't a mistake. It was a decision to make the ministry and Ravi's reputation more important than truth.
Yeah,
And that's
absolutely.
what they need to be confessing, but I don't think they're going to be doing that.
Well, unfortunately, and part of me does wonder, and I can probably be a little bit cynical too, but part of me does wonder if, you know, I certainly think that everything in the report is true. I'm uh, not questioning the report, but if it might be kind of an easy sort of get out of jail free card for people who might have known more, that all the heat's on Ravi now, which again, deservedly so, but that if there aren't going to be enough tough questions asked of other people and what they might have been aware of.
It's a really good point. You know, there's lots of stuff that that report did not cover. How did some of these women with massage training get visas to come to the US? Was there immigration fraud? Was there trafficking? I mean, Ravi clearly had a pattern and practice of being sexually active with the massage women. They were bringing women in from overseas for him. That is sex trafficking. Did the ministry know about this? What happened with their paperwork? What were they? You know, they declared themselves a church a couple of years ago, so they didn't have to be as vigorous with their disclosures. What were they covering up? I'm absolutely with you on that, Josh. There is lots of dirt at RZIM, and Ravi is now the fall guy. Okay, he deserves to be exposed, but I'd like to see what else happened at RZIM that has the current leadership peeing their pants about their own personal liability. You know, and I don't know enough about that, but I think there's a lot of worried people in high places in RZIM who are all all too happy to let Ravi be their whipping boy right now.
Well, and all of that does make me question if the rest of those types of things are ever seriously going to be looked into at all.
They probably aren't. They probably aren't. I mean, here's you know how these things go. It's we now know the truth. The report has come out, and Ravi was a really nasty guy, and they're going to make conciliatory, contrite statements about it. We're going to take his name off the letterhead, and we'll get back to preaching the gospel. And you know, your tribe is very forgiving. That money will keep flowing, and they'll be business as usual in about 6 months. Maybe, I don't know. I mean, I'm hoping they go under because I just think it's corrupt to the core. There are good people there on the inside, but the organization was created by a sexual predator and a highly deceptive man. It was built up to be a cult of personality, and I don't see any benefit to reforming it at this point. I don't think it can be reformed.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, that was part of my impression when I read the report. Considering this, and they talk in the report about the scope of their investigation, and they acknowledge that it was limited, but it just made me think, with all of his travels and things that that they were able to investigate, that just the limitations they had in technology, cell phones, things that they didn't have access to, and again, what other people might have been aware of. I was left with the thought that it's really the tip of the iceberg. Again, I don't know if we're going to go below the surface really anymore in the future, um, but
Well, you know, you raise a good point. The one of the things in the report was, speaking of this issue of what did the leadership know, Ravi told his people that his cell phones will exonerate him. That if they saw his cell phones, they would. And then when two of the senior leaders approached him and said, "We'd like to see your cell phones," he said no, and he got very angry. I think they used the term. He responded with rage, and he said he would quit the organization if they pressed him on this. So normally responsive people who care about truth in an organization that's supposedly dedicated to a worthy cause, when you hear that the head dude is not letting you see the evidence that he says is going to exonerate him, and he threatens to quit if you keep asking for him for that stuff, at that point you sort of have an ethical duty to speak out in a really big way. And what did RZIM do? They didn't do that, you know. And I don't know a single person in RZIM who quit out of principle. And acknowledged that doing so publicly. So I don't know who those two senior people were who should have known years ago that Ravi was concealing evidence, but I wouldn't be surprised if they're still there in senior leadership positions. I don't know that.
Sure.
But, you know, and those are the same people, if they're still there, who are going to say, geez, we're so sorry we made a mistake. You didn't make a mistake.
Yeah,
You got caught.
absolutely. Uh, Once again, thank you so much. Last question I have, you again, you've spent years looking into this, and the report is out today, and I was wondering, what's next?
You know, I'm going to be washing my hands of all things Ravi pretty soon. I think my work's done, and I thought it was done when Ravi died. I was getting ready to just write a final, here's the final summary, and see you all and in the philosophy world. And then in May, just a few days after he died, I got an email from someone who said, I knew Ravi. I worked with him in the spas. He was a sexual pervert, and I had a lot of communication with this person, and that led to Spagate. And here we are now. You know, if I'd like to send thanks out to that woman, she doesn't want her name used, but if it were not for her contacting me, Ravi Zacharias would be well on his way to sainthood right now. And I think this is a scary reminder of how close we came to not knowing about any of this stuff. All those women suffering in silence as Ravi is praised up to high heaven. It was one courageous woman speaking out quietly to me that broke this story. So we owe a lot of thanks to her, and I hope someday she gets her gets praised, is willing to come out and let people thank her directly. But for her, we wouldn't know any of this stuff. No.
Certainly amazing, and yeah, it, kind of reminds me of the old the end of Scooby Doo cartoons, where the person would say, "I would have gotten away with it had it been, you know." And so yeah, definitely appreciate her, and I appreciate the work that you did on this, and again, bringing a lot of this to light. And I'm sure you've talked about this a little bit, but I'm sure you went through just withering personal attacks and just unjustified hatred, just for telling the truth. And
Well, thank you. Yeah, there was a lot of insults, but you know, I never went through anything close to what the victims went through, but it's been unpleasant a lot. And Josh, thank you also for being one of the very few pastors making public statements about the need to look into this. And I really hope that this all leads to more than just sort of, we took down another nasty preacher. I hope that you folks can really, you know, you and your colleagues in the Christian world can really take the important lessons here and bring about some systemic change, because you owe it to the victims. We all owe it to the victims, and I hope it happens.
thank you so much, Steve. Again, he's got a book, Cover Up in the Kingdom. The website RaviWatch.com. Your YouTube, you said Friendly Banjo Atheist. I know I've viewed it before. That's the full name of it, correct?
Yeah, that's my YouTube channel, which will probably not have much Ravi stuff on it ever again, and I'm glad about that. So, thanks, Josh.
So thank you so much, and again, truly appreciate your time.